Hello and welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm Les from Digital Creations, bringing you Truth Proofs live stream for this Thursday night. Now, I hope you've all had a good week up to now, and I know we've got some great accounts coming out tonight from a really esteemed guest from America, and but I won't introduce her. I'll let Paul do that. Now, first of all, we just got a little intro, I think, and then we'll come back and welcome a few people into the chat. So let's hit the ground running, folks. Here we go. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little intro. First of all, we'll have a look, see who he's in tonight's chat on the stream. And looks as if we've got Tino in, Ralph Winter, Deborah Singleton, of course, and Andy are our moderators for tonight. Alison Buttle's in, Nigel Logan, and Miss Gilly B, and Paula E. Green. And welcome to the show, guys. It's going to be a great show tonight. But I'm sure you don't want to hear from me. You want to hear from the great man, Mr. Paul Sinclair. Here we go.
Thank you very much, Les. I don't know about the great man, but it's lovely to be here tonight and see all these people in the chat. And I'm really looking forward to talking to Dr. Irena Scott. Before we get into, hi, Irena, great to see you. And before we get into what Irena's about and her experiences and her work within the UFO field, I think we should know a little bit about her. Now, this isn't off the top of my head. I'm reading this. Irena kindly sent me a short bio, but I'll just do a few paragraphs of it. So, Dr. Irena Scott received her Ph.D. from the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine in physiology. Did a post-doctoral research at Cornell University and has had a professorship at Bonaventure University. I'm glad I could read that. Her MS was from the University of Nevada, her BS from Ohio State University in astronomy and biology. She has done research and teaching at Ohio State University, College of Medicine, and the University of Nevada. The Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, employed her in PhD level GS-11 research in satellite photography, including its air order battle section. So there's loads more, absolutely loads more. But if that doesn't tell you that this lady has been within the field of technology and paranormal research, everything you could think of, if we could have a round of applause, I'd give it. So, Irena, welcome and thank you for agreeing to talk to us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself? It doesn't have to be UFO paranormal related to start with, and let's move on from there.
Well, I've been in scientific work my whole life, and then I decided to start writing, and I've written about several things, but one of them is UFOs, and it's a very interesting topic, and I got deeper than I ever intended to in it, and it's continues to be interesting.
How did the subject of UFOs then, and we'll encompass paranormal, affect your academic career? Did you hold back at first, or did it never bother you?
It didn't bother me because I didn't say anything about it ever until I was about to retire.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, obviously for them reasons then. Did you think it would have affected your career?
Well, I'm sure it would in the Defense Intelligence Agency because I had a real high security clearance. But I think that otherwise, I mean, when I finally did sort of come out of the UFO closet, people were always saying, "Oh, did you see a UFO?" and all that, and harassing me. So I'm glad I didn't say anything sooner. I don't know if it affected my career. It definitely would have been affected, I think, in the
Yeah.
defense
So,
intelligence.
d- does this interest then stem from an early sighting or experience?
I think it did. My first experience was when I was really, really young, and a long time before I ever heard of UFOs or spaceships or anything else. And I didn't know it was a UFO experience until many years later. But the first thing that happened was we were poor, and my family was living in an old farmhouse, and we didn't have inside plumbing, and my father had been farming with horses and things. So I was practically back in the Stone Age. And my sister and I were in an attic room sleeping on two other sides of the room. And I was about 6 and she was about 4. And there was this thing flying around the room.
Oh, right.
And so it might, in later analysis, it was probably a close encounter. We didn't know anything about UFOs or anything like it. It just looked like a piece of metal flying around the room. And we were both asleep, and I woke up, and this thing was flying around.
How big would it have been, Irena?
It was pretty small. It was about, I'd say, it looked like a piece of metal, and it was kind of shaped like a cough drop, or maybe they'd say a Tic Tac now.
Yeah.
And about that size, or maybe a little bit larger, and it glowed. It looked like real hot metal, like iron. And I was just curious, and it was flying around. And what was interesting about it is that it kind of knew where things were. I mean, if it'd come to a wall, it would turn before it got to it. There was furniture in the room. It didn't run into anything. It flew around, just sort of a random motion.
But intelligently controlled.
Yeah, but it didn't bump into anything or reverse or anything. It, avoided things. And I was just watching, and it came close to my head and close to my sister's head. But I didn't even know she was awake. She apparently knew I was awake. But then it flew up to the ceiling, and it turned before it got to the ceiling, and it flew along the ceiling, and it flew to the lamp. And it was an attic room, and the walls came up to a place in the ceiling.
Yeah, I can picture it, yeah.
And the chandelier, it was turned off, of course, because it was night, but the chandelier was right in the middle of the ceiling. And the thing flew over the chandelier, and it didn't feel its way around, just around the periphery between the chandelier and the wall. It began circling. And it circled and circled and circled. And I think it sped up a little. It's hard to remember that long. And then it just came down in a perfect spiral. And suddenly, we both just became terrified and ran out of the room screaming. And we fell down the stairs and hit the door. And we scrambled trying to get the door open. I mean, we were just terrified all of a sudden, and ran into our parents, and they said, "Oh, you didn't," they just said we were making it up, that we didn't see anything. And so that was my first experience, but it was lucky because I had somebody else. I mean, we weren't even talking to each other, but the thing happened to both of us. And in looking at it now, it's kind of like mind control, because we both woke up at the same time. We had no idea why. And then we got scared at the same time. And the room was closed. The door was closed. The windows were closed. So we don't know how the thing got in. And so that was our first experience.
You can move on from that if you want, and we can just keep progressing, and if you're happy.
Okay. Well, we had no idea what it was. And later, when I found out about UFOs, we weren't supposed to talk about UFOs, and I didn't know it was a UFO anyway. But many years later, I read a book by Jenny Randles, who said that children sometimes have sightings of small UFOs in their bedroom. And the same children often will see UFOs later when they're older. It's sort of a trend or something. And I think my sister and I were the only people had this happen. We both saw a UFO when we were a kid, and then had a much larger sighting later. And we had, after we found out what UFOs were, we both had sightings, but we didn't talk about them for many, many years.
So the larger sighting later, well, that with your sister as well, or?
Yeah,
So how did that begin? At what age were you? Your teens or 20s or?
yeah, that was in 20s. And at that time, I was working for the DIA in Washington, D.C., and I had all these clearances and everything. And my sister was doing postgraduate work at Drew University in New Jersey. So we were on the eastern seacoast, so we decided to go up and see the New England states, and just for vacation and things. And so one morning, I drove up there and I picked up a couple of people from DIA, and they drove up with me. And I took pictures of them and my sister at their campus. And then we took off for Boston. We were going to stay all night at Boston and then go up along the seacoast. Well, we got there pretty early and it was light. And so I drove on up into New Hampshire and back. And I found out later this was where the Betty and Barney, where maybe part of the Betty and Barney Hill event took place.
Yeah.
But we went to Boston, and I drove into Boston, and I started looking for motels, and everything was filled up. This was before, cell phones and everything.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go on out and look around the outer belt. And we were driving out of Boston, going west, and there was a airport south of us. I think it was called the Norwood Municipal Airport. And it was just a small airport, and we could see airplanes coming in and landing, and we could see their wing lights, the green and red lights, and their landing lights and stuff, and everything looked normal, except for this one thing that seemed to be lower than the airplanes, and it was just a pure white light that was blinking. And it was pretty noticeable. And my sister kept saying, "This is odd," and she even said, "This is a UFO." And I kept saying, "Oh no, it's a helicopter." And we were arguing about it. And so we both admitted then to each other that we'd seen UFOs. And that was the first time we ever talked about it. But anyway, I turned on to Route 9, which is also Route 91, which is the freeway that goes along the coast. And I came to a woods, and there was this light in the middle of the woods that I could see. And it was like a glass sphere, and there was a light in the middle that seemed to be, I don't know if it was rotating or the sphere was rotating or something. There seemed to be a band around the sphere that was sort of rotating. And this light would just go through a spectrum of all the colors of red and all the colors of blue, and sort of merge and go through the blue colors, the spectrum, and the red colors like light red and dark red and things like that. And I couldn't imagine what it was. And then the inside of our car lit up in green. And I couldn't imagine what was going on then. And I looked around and I thought this must be coming from that light, but that light was never green. And I couldn't figure out, and I looked around, I couldn't see it any place except in the car. And the inside of the car lit up in green. And I had it in my notes that I discussed it with my sister, but my sister didn't remember anything about it. And so anyway, I didn't know what was going on, but I kept on driving and I was looking for a motel, and my sister kept paying attention to this white thing that we were watching. And we kept arguing, and then she started yelling at me to stop because it was going to go over the road. And I finally stopped because she was just yelling at me. And so I looked over and I saw a meteor way off in the distance, and I started to point at it. And then I was going to say, "Dingbat, there's a helicopter." And I was going to, tell her it's a helicopter. And then it came right over the trees where I could see where I saw the meteor, and it wasn't anything like it.
No,
helicopter.
it's incredible. Just jump back to car and inside of the car when the car lit up green. Do you recall looking at your hands and they looked green, or was it just a green light inside the car? Did everything look like a phosphorus green?
It wasn't real bright. It was just like several Christmas tree lights had come on. They were
Right.
just green, but I didn't notice. Yeah, I just noticed, everything looked green,
Yep.
like reflecting green, but I don't know if
No,
it
no.
was or what.
And the light that you saw as a little girl with your sister, did you and your sister talk about it much afterwards?
Yeah, we did a little bit, but not too much because nobody believed us.
No.
But I remember the next morning we talked to my mother, and my mother said, "Oh, you just made it up." And we weren't even talking to each other, so I knew we didn't make it up because
Yeah.
she was awake and so on.
Yeah.
But she told us we made it up, or I made it up, I guess. And
Well, that's honestly, it's fascinating. I mean, if you've any more of your own experiences, I'd love to listen to them, or we can just move on a bit and talk about some of the cases that you've worked on. I mean, I did tell you before, prior to the show, that I had actually spoke to Philip Mantle today, and I weren't aware of the amount of research that you've done over the years for other people. And just being in the background while other people, I won't say basked in the glory, should we say? I don't think there's any glory in the subject, but you've not got as much credit for the amount of effort and time that you've put in as what you should have had. And you've written your own books now, which we'll touch on in a while. But do you want to tell us about any of the cases that you've worked on over the years?
well, one case I remember in particular was called the Portage County or Ravinia, Ohio case. And this was an instance where there were two, a sheriff deputy and another sheriff named Spar and Neff, who it started out they were two policemen, and they heard over the police radio that somebody in Michigan had seen a UFO, and they laughed and cackled about it. And they were supposed to then go inspect a car that was off the road. And they found the car. It said something like 7 steps to hell or something, had a lightning picture on the door or something. And then they saw this UFO and they were no longer laughing. And this thing came over them, very, very bright, right over them. And they were terrified at that point and thought they had better get in the car and get something between them and the object. And so they jumped in the car and they were on the police radio. And they reported it to the station or whatever the police, the police radio station. And they were on the radio all the time this happened. But the radio person asked them to if they had the camera, and they said no. And they said, shoot it. Well, they had second thoughts about that.
Yeah.
Didn't even think about it. But they started following it, and they were in Ohio. And the thing went kind of slow. And they followed it, but they were on the radio the whole time. And they notified other policemen who also saw it. And they went by, I think it was the Akron airport, I'm not sure. And there was some information that it had been on radar, and some jet planes had been notified, but the thing was going pretty slow. And they said it would sort of go up high over cities and come back down. And then if they got tied up in traffic, it would kind of wait for them. And they continued following it clear into Pennsylvania. And then I guess they ran out of gas or something. And they had no idea what it was, and they reported it as a UFO. Well, a lot of people were very interested in it because they were on the radio the whole time talking, and there were a whole lot of other witnesses.
What the transcript picked up and recorded by any amateur radio people, or do you not know?
I don't know, but the UFO investigators definitely got pretty good information about it. But
Yeah.
Project Blue Book investigated and told them they were crazy and they'd just seen a like Venus and a satellite or something, which was ridiculous and had nothing to do with it. but they lost their reputation and lost their jobs and everything
Really?
because they thought they were crazy.
What year was that, Irene? I'm sorry if I missed it. I don't know if you said what decade then.
I think it was 1965. I'm not real sure, around there.
Okay. Is there any more that you want to touch on while we're talking about the cases that you've looked into? Be as historic as you like. We're not bothered because they'll be fresh to my ears and our listeners. And before we go on, anybody with any questions for Irena, please put them in capitals, and I'm sure she'll, like I do, will attempt to answer them. If we can't, we'll just say no. Over to you, Irene. Have we got any more cases that you've looked into?
When I looked into, oh, is somebody talking?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, okay. Another one I investigated was with somebody else, and this was these people that they lived in near, I think it was Logan, Ohio, and they were on sort of a farm, and they saw these lights over their cornfield. They were kind of red lights that were flying around and blinking. And one of them followed a car that went up the road, and they saw it following it, and it flew back up. And they notified all kinds of people. They notified the police department. They notified the radio, the TV, Wright-Patterson, everything you could think of. And some policemen came out and saw the things and had no idea what they were. And then an airplane came up over the cornfield and started sort of going in a grid pattern. And one of the lights went up and followed the airplane. And two people had investigated, and another person, I went out and talked to him. And I guess later the lights had just disappeared, but they were there for quite a while. And they had told everybody and just called and had plenty of time to call lots of people. So it was like real time when people investigated. Nobody knew what the airplane flying the grid was, but the policemen had definitely come out and looked and had no idea what was going on. And so what was kind of interesting is that then this other person I went out and investigated, and when we came home, apparently they had another sighting that day, that night. But it was a real nice.
Do you think that happens? Is that your experience, that when there is a sighting, something quite substantial, that, you know, when you've looked into the case, you've found other sightings packed around it? Have you come across that before?
Let me think. I think so, and I can't think of any specific ones right now. That when I told you about.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And when you've obviously, with nature of the jobs that you've done and your employment and employers, have you ever been privy to any conversations regarding unexplained phenomena, or did it never touch on that, the work that you were doing?
Well, I was in air order of battle for a while, and our work was to identify airplanes over a particular area of the Earth. And at that was where I was working when I had that UFO sighting with my sister.
Yeah.
I didn't go in and say I see UFOs, because that would have been suicide.
Yeah.
It bothered me quite a bit. And I just mentioned something about reading about UFOs or something. And it turned out my supervisors said, I thought everybody'd laugh at me, but it turned out my supervisors said they had reported a UFO on our classified film to their superiors. And I saw it and everything. And I think it was on 2 different frames. And their supervisors told them it wasn't there, and then it was a spot on the film. Well, it obviously wasn't, because there were 2 pictures and I could even get it in stereo. So I knew it wasn't. And they did. And they sent it to some people that studied spots on films and analyzed film. I think it was called sensitive density and something like that. And they said, no, it wasn't a spot. And it obviously wasn't, because it was in stereo in 2 different frames. but their supervisors continued to tell them it was a spot on the film. And so they were really mystified by that.
Do you, well, obviously, I think we probably all know that, I wouldn't say the governments are covering up, they're just not telling, you know, what they know. Do you think it's all governments and important people throughout the world that know the reality of these things? Or do you think that a lot of people, do you think we're all being naive by imagining that everybody within governments and intelligence agencies know that this stuff's real?
Well, I don't know. I doubt if many people do, but the DIA in particular was taking photographs of everything on Earth with satellites. And so they were taking the, you know, had sections for airplanes and things. So I would think that of anybody, that they would be the people that would know. And so I suspected way back in 1968 that maybe they had photography of UFOs. Yeah. Maybe they were hiding something, but I wouldn't say anybody, the whole government or anything like that would.
No. Okay. And now I'm going to touch on one thing, and you just say you don't want to talk about it if you don't want to. It's only because due to talking to Philip today, so you can blame Philip. But I understand your husband worked in Area 51.
Uh-huh.
Did he speak to you about what were happening there?
Well, at the time, when we were first married, for some reason, I just wasn't too interested in UFOs, and he was telling me about where he worked and showing, we'd drive around and he'd show me how he got into, he used to live in Mercury, Nevada, and they would take him on a bus to work and things. And for some reason, I didn't pay too much attention to it. But I asked him later, and he had a high security clearance, a Q clearance for the Atomic Energy Commission. But he said most of Area 51 was underground. And if he was alive now, I would ask him all kinds of questions, but I didn't. And he said they were very secretive about, I mean, they had Groom Lake where they took off, you know, it was a nice kind of secluded area with a nice smooth surface for airplanes taking off. But he said in a lot of cases that in spite of his clearance, if he was in a room with an airplane, they would have it covered up and nobody was allowed to look at it.
Okay, well, thank you. And as I say, I didn't know whether you'd even want to talk about any of that, but that's fine. And right, I'll tell you what we'll do now. We've just stopped for a moment. We'll ask Les if he's got any questions for us, Irene.
Yeah, there is some questions coming, guys, and let's have a look then. See if I can get myself on the screen. There we go. Okay, yeah, we've got some good questions in tonight for our guest and Paul. And one question comes from Space Cadet Lottie, and the question is, Irena, it's for you. Can you give a brief explanation of your book, Sacred Corridors, please? Yes.
In working in places that involved UFOs, and a lot of it was about a study that was done at Battelle Memorial Institute of UFOs, and it was done for, it was Special Report, Project Blue Book Special Report number 14. That was a Battelle study of UFOs that was done for Project Blue Book. I had a lot of information about that. I also had a number
Just froze for a moment, but I'm sure Irene will be back. Yeah, are you? Yeah, we might come back.
Yeah, I've got a slight technical issue there, folks, with Irena's connection to America. I don't know if she'll log off and ring back. If Paul, if you want to go through the motions there, probably. That she's back. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Internet problems. So if you want to recap from Space Cadet Lottie, or for her.
Okay. Part of it was at Wright-Patterson, and I had been sent there as a part of my work, and I was on the secured area of the base, and I just wandered around with a camera and took a lot of pictures of buildings and things, which was useful later because it was a secured area and people aren't allowed in there. And so I looked up buildings and had different views that, you know, people don't have and that sort of thing. There's a lot of rumors that there's bodies and UFOs and everything there. And I didn't see those, but I was in what they called the Blue Room, which when I was there, I didn't know anything. I didn't know I was there. I knew I was where I was, but I didn't know it was the Blue Room. And so I saw a lot of what would be classified, but I didn't see bodies or UFOs or anything like that.
And do you believe that they were there though, or do you just not know?
Well, they talk about vaults and crypts and underground storage, and I suspect there's a lot of that around Wright-Patterson. But when I was there, once the archivist showed me all around. That was when I was in the Blue Room, but I was escorted at that time.
Yeah.
And so the other times I was on work time, and so I wouldn't have just wandered around and got myself in trouble too. So, I mean, I wandered around, took pictures where I wasn't supposed to be, but I didn't do anything that would attract anybody's attention.
Right, thank you. Les, have we more questions, please?
Yes, we have a question from Patricia Adams Wright, and she's asking you, Irena, was there much discrimination being a female in this field of inquiry?
I majored in when I started out at OSU, but I started applying, and I wasn't even allowed to apply. I would go into job places to apply, and it'd say male only for physics and chemistry and all that. And they would toss me out of the room and say, you're not allowed in here. And when I tried to apply for astronomy positions, they would say, no, you can't apply. We won't give you an application because you're not allowed to apply. And so there was a huge amount of discrimination. And even when I was working for the DIA, there were only 2 other females on the whole floor I was working with. And in scientific work later, there was a lot of discrimination.
There's a book there, Irena, isn't there, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Irena. Another question has come in from Val. Val is asking, what do you really think UFOs are? I think every domain has an overseer, and UFOs are overseers or controllers of this earth.
I have to admit, I don't know what they are. I don't have any idea. So I can't say too much.
I think that's the answer I'd have given.
We have another question from Patricia Adams Wright again. That's 2 questions tonight, Patricia. Did Irena's mother mention later any experiences she might have had? So any experiences your mother might have had?
Yeah, she didn't call them UFOs though. In one instance, when we were kids, she told us about seeing this lightning ball, and it came into her bedroom. And my sister and I don't remember exactly the same thing. What I remember is it came into the bedroom with her, and she was terrified. And she jumped on the bed, and then it circled her bed, rolled in a window, circled her bed, and rolled back out a window. And my sister, well, when there were lightning storms, she always made us come downstairs. That's another reason I know when we had that sighting when we were kids that it was good weather, because she would have made us come downstairs if it wasn't. But she'd make us come downstairs. My sister said that that was because she was really scared of lightning, and that lightning ball experience had been really terrifying for her. And she's the one, a part of my book that I've just recently written was about a strange sound. And that was, I was in Missouri getting my PhD, and she was in Ohio. And she'd called me one night and said, "Did you hear this noise?" And I said, "No," we were 600 miles away. And I teased her quite a bit. And, she'd always said that if she was losing her mind or something, we should tell her. So she, ahead of time. So I started telling her, go to the insane asylum, it's all over, and joking with her. But I always wondered about that sound. And that's a good part of my recent book,
Yeah,
is I never figured out what the sound was.
I know that hopefully we're going to touch on the sound in a while, but just while we're on with that, you tell me if I've got title wrong. Did you write a book called Inside the Lightning Ball?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so unless Les has got some more questions, if you have, Les, we'll roll on, but do you want to give us a little overview of that? Because these are all books that are available to buy via Amazon and other outlets, aren't they? And we may as well say that, Irena, because they're well worth reading. And just tell us a little bit about Inside the Lightning Ball.
Inside the Lightning Ball is about my own experiences with UFOs, and I had other witnesses nearly all the time. It wasn't just me, so I was very lucky on that. And I was also lucky because I was able to get pictures of some of them. But I called it Inside the Lightning Ball because I had seen a lightning ball when I was really young, like about 5 or something. And I don't think it was anything weird. I think it was just a lightning ball.
Yeah.
But later, and I was sort of comparing lightning balls with UFOs and saying these are different things and things. But then I started reading about lightning balls, and they were just as mysterious as UFOs. But another time, I might have been inside a lightning ball, and I have it. I made it. I had a video going when it happened, and I put that on YouTube, so it's on YouTube. But I was standing on a porch that was elevated. It was a wood porch with posts about 15 feet tall.
Yeah.
And there was a volcanic dike in the background, a volcanic crater. It was in Texas, and there's no volcanoes in Texas, but these were extinct volcanoes.
Yeah.
It was in the area of Marfa, which has the Marfa lights, but it was the opposite direction. I was just filming this volcanic thing, and a lightning bolt just came down right beside me and hit, and I saw the blue lightning come down and hit, and I had my camera on, and it just was really, really bright, and the sound was horrendous, and I couldn't see for a while, and I couldn't hear for a while, and I came in and looked at it on my video because I thought, oh, I got a lightning bolt, and I didn't see anything. I just saw a whiteout, and I was extremely disappointed. And what it looked like when I saw it was, I saw the bolt of lightning, then it was like a round white sphere. But anyway, I was disappointed, and I took the video home and put it on my computer and slowed it down. And this turned out different because there was a cell phone tower about maybe 150 yards or feet away, some distance away, and on the other side of a bunch of trees. And my camera had come back on before I could see. And what it filmed is that there was a guy wire from there were guy wire, big guy, this was a real tall tower. There were guy wires, and I saw this short going up guy wire. And at first I thought it hit the tower, and then I thought, no, it went up the guy wire that was in my direction, and it just shorted right up the guy wire. And so I was real impressed by that. I mean, it's a huge short, and this guy wire was a big thing. And so I was just amazed at the power of the lightning because it had hit right beside me. It didn't hurt me. The camera had filmed, suddenly there was a whiteout. And then he had filmed this um, short, this big short, I mean, it was big, going up the guy wire. And then after that, the alarm went off in the house. And so it was really neat because I had a good study of lightning, and it didn't kill me or anything. I didn't even feel anything. But
That is what I was going to say. Like, it's a wonder you survived it. I mean, so close.
yeah, because the posts for the porch came down in barrels that were in sand, and I think that probably the air and the wood porch had insulated me. And
And
so
did the impact of it leave a mark on ground?
I don't think I even looked.
No.
I should have.
Yeah, it's incredible. Years ago, I was working with a guy, Paul White. We were on a building site. We were close to a storm. We knew it were coming, and we were on a roof, all steel scaffolding. Can't match yours, by the way, but we decided to get off the roof and go and sit in the van and wait till storm passed. And we'd only been sat in the van, not even 5 minutes, and the lightning hit the scaffold where we'd been. That would have been end of us, literally. And the whiteout you're talking about, it literally was a whiteout, yeah. But I think we'd have been on scaffold, and I don't think we'd have fared very well. But that's quite incredible. And is there more questions, Les? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Yes, I've got a question here from Phil Chapman. Welcome to the show, Phil. Hope you're enjoying the show tonight with our esteemed guest, Irena Scott. Yes, yeah. So the question is, Irena, have you investigated any men in black cases?
No, I don't think I have.
Well, before we move away from it, Irena, what's your views on Men in Black?
What my views are is something strange I came across with Kenneth Arnold. And by accident, I had got his very first book. And this was back in 1947, before anybody heard of Men in Black or anything. And he'd talked to this man that said part of it was a hoax, but this man had said he was in a boat and a UFO flew by and dropped particles. Well, the man said that then this other man had come and told him and described exactly what he saw in detail, and then told him to shut up about it and not say anything threatening him, which was sort of like a Man in Black episode, but it was way before anybody ever heard of Men in Black. And so I thought I had written about that in my book, and I thought that was very strange. Just right off, the very first person that was involved in UFOs had sort of a Man in Black experience.
And I bet you, I mean, I can't say, but I bet there's more, Irena. I bet there's more than that. It's probably because we've got, as a society, as a culture, we've got that we'll more talk about it more openly. We're finding out about these things. But like you've just said, way before people talked about the Man in Black experience, there is one. Or you know, and it'd be brilliant. I mean, I don't know where we'd look in an archive to find that kind of report, because they're often a little bit sinister, aren't they? So people don't openly speak about being visited. I jump into Philip. I spoke to Philip today again about, I'm always going on about XS894 1970 case. I said, but there's still more mileage in it, and there's a farm at Flamborough where the UFO event that took place over the North Sea on September the 8th, 1970, around the same time, people in Flamborough knew that a UFO landed in a farmer's field in September of 1970. Now, I've got to speak to the people who own the farm. The actual farmer is still alive, but his children know about this as well. He was visited and asked to plough out the field where it had landed. uh, and by men in suits. So that's something I've got to follow up. And Les has been quite instrumental in that, because he's revived that little bit for me. And you remember what I'm talking about. I'm sure he will, Les. So I've Les to thank for that, because when we get round to it, he'll probably come with me. But sorry, this is about you, Irena. More questions, Les?
Yes, we have a question from Patricia Adams Wright. Another question from Patricia. Do you see the general public's view has changed over the years as regards UFOs?
Just took one of my questions.
Yeah, has people's has the public's view perception has changed as it over the years?
Yeah, I think a big change in 2017, when the New York Times printed the article about UFOs and took it kind of seriously. And then earlier this year, the government came out, and the government had always said, that there's nothing to it. They're all hallucinations, or crazy people, or liars. There's absolutely nothing to it. Everything can be explained by science. And the government actually reversed its opinion on things and published it. So, I mean, that's not much, but it's real big in the field of UFOs, in my opinion.
It's massive, really. I agree with you. And when you think the explanations, you'll have seen the explanations for the sightings change over the decades then, Irena, from the lanterns and the weather balloons and all the staple explanations that are no longer used to explain UFOs. Is it the UFOs that's changing, or do you think we're just adapting and finding new ways of trying to explain them away?
Well, the government's strange, because the very first study the government did was called Project Sign. And in that, I have a copy of it. They said, that there's a possibility that these are something outside the field of science that we don't know about. They're possibly extraterrestrial things. Then, and they had, a perfectly logical analysis. Then it went into Project Grudge, and then it went into Project Blue Book, where they just debunked everything. And then they continued debunking. They had the Robertson panel and the Condon report and everything else debunked. So they're actually coming way back to 1947 or so, where they originally said there might be something to it. But they, obfuscated everything from 1947 until just about now.
And for something that doesn't exist, they've invested enormous amounts of money to say it doesn't exist, haven't they? Absolutely mammoth amounts of money. And so Project Blue Book, I don't mean work on any of these projects, but did you know any of the people that worked on the Project Blue Book? Hynek, for example?
Yeah, Jenny Zeidman, my book, Sacred Corridors, I used a lot of her material, and she worked on Project Blue Book. She had started out under Dr. Hynek, and she was actually the person who had selected the sightings that he investigated. And so she went way back into Project Blue Book. And then she had also investigated the study that Battelle had made for Project Blue Book. And so I had used a lot of her notes in my book, including her correspondence with Dr. Hynek.
How many people involved in these projects that set out not as debunkers, but set out with a more skeptical view on the subject, do you think changed their mind? Is there any notable ones besides Hynek?
It's hard to say, because I don't think people would have mentioned it if they did until recently, and a lot of people are dead that changed their minds. I think that one of the people at Battelle that did a heavy investigation was really sincerely interested, in spite of the fact they were probably maybe had supposed to refute UFOs, but Battelle did a real good study on it.
everything. I suppose they were employed to load everything in the direction that these things, and this interloaded question, by the way, but to load everything in a direction that these things didn't exist, there was nothing to it, because that was the nature of the reports, weren't it? I don't think these reports were ever devised to prove the existence of the UFO. Am I right or wrong?
Well, I think the first part of the Project Blue Book Report 14 did that. They analyzed their data and came out with the probability that UFOs are real. I mean, like 1 in a million chance that they weren't real. And they did a real good statistical study of it. But I think later, when it came out that when a whistleblower blew the whistle and told about the study, then they had to redo their statistics and make it look like they weren't real. And I don't think the way they did it was exactly honest statistically, but I think it looked like the people that did that study, at least some of them, were very sincere about trying to find out what UFOs were.
Yeah. So do you think, because I know one of our listeners took my question, now, do you think the subject of UFOs and the unexplained phenomena has moved on I'm trying to word it a different way, moved on in the last 25, or moved forwards in the last 25 years? Do you think we've made giant leaps, or do you think it's just slowly moving?
You mean what's secret, or what's...
the advancement? Do you think we're all, as a society, we're all sort of more open to the idea that, well, perhaps this stuff's real, perhaps there is a reality to it, or do you think we know it's real? We'd actually drip fed it in things now, in adverts, in children's cartoons. Everything we watch seems to be alien stroke UFO related. Is that disclosure?
Well, in a way, I think science is progressing. Back when UFOs started, we hadn't even gone into space. We were having airplanes, and that was it. After that, we went into space, and then we discovered solar systems that were all over the universe and planets all over. At first, we kind of had this egocentric idea that we were the center of the universe and the center of everything. And then we found out there's planets all over the place, zillions and zillions of them. And so the probability is that, I mean, logical people would say the probability is that there's more life than just us. But the scientists had been saying, oh, we're the only life in the universe, which is very egotistical. I mean, I don't know if we found anything, but I think it's changed. I think just the science has changed. And then also the quantum mechanics theory. It used to be just a mechanical thing of like clockwork and everything. And now it's all fuzzy and with all kinds of weird results that also make you wonder even what reality is.
What do you think to the people that say, oh, if there are other intelligences, other life forms out there, they can't possibly reach us because of the distances involved? Because from your own experience, from what you've seen over the years and other people's, it's already here. What would you say to people like that?
Well, they have perfectly good quantum mechanics experiments where they are saying entangled particles that one is one place and one is another, and they instantly know which state the other one's in, and it's not much faster than the speed of light. And the theory is that one could be on one side of the universe and the other could be on the total opposite side of the universe, and they would still know which condition one would stay in the opposite condition.
Yeah.
And so that sort of shows that humans probably don't understand time and space very well to start with.
No, excellent. Yeah. So if we move on a little bit, and we'll talk about your new book, and we'll probably get to some more questions eventually. But Beyond Pascagoula, and the rest of the amazing story. Is that the title? Do you want to go into a little bit about that, Irena, please?
Well, there's been several books on Pascagoula, and this was an abduction story.
Yeah, perhaps I need to stop, and because I'm rushing you forward there. Do you want to? Some people might not know about Pascagoula, and enlighten us all a little bit, myself included.
Okay. There were two fishermen. There were two people that worked in a shipbuilding place, and there was an older man, 45, Charles Hickson, and a younger man, either 18 or 19, Calvin Parker. And they had finished their day of work, and they were family friends. The father was a friend of the father, and the son, and so on, generational. And the younger man was like a son, I think. And after their day of work, they decided to go fishing. And this had nothing to do with UFOs. They were just, fishing. And so they had fished several places, and they went out on this pier and were fishing away. And this thing came down. I don't know if it came toward them or if it came down, but anyway, with a blue light and real bright light on the inside. And three things came out of it that were kind of human shaped and abducted them. They grabbed them, and they were big, strong men, but they both just were like they were paralyzed when these things grabbed them and took them aboard. And the younger man didn't want to talk about it at all, but the older man did. And then they were absolutely terrified, and they took him back and put him back on the pier, and the thing that flew away or disappeared or whatever. And the one was just standing with his arms up and couldn't move, and then he fell over, and they both fell over. And they said, that they'd been abducted, and they were both just terrified, and really absolutely terrified beyond anything. So the older man, he was experienced with things like with experienced in terror, and he said that we should report it. And the younger man didn't want anything to do with it. He just said, "I don't want anything to do with it. Don't report it," and all that.
This is Calvin Parker, the younger one.
Huh?
Calvin, the younger one. Yeah.
Well, the older one thought he should report it, so he went to the newspaper, and they were closed for the night, and they said, no, nothing. So he called the air base, Kessler Air Base, which is close there. It was a big, important air base. And they said, the Air Force no longer takes UFO reports. Please report to the sheriff. Well, the younger man didn't want to do anything, but the older man called the sheriff and said, you're not going to believe this, and don't laugh at me, but we were just abducted by a UFO. And so they had him eventually that night come into the sheriff's office, and they divided him and interviewed him separately, and then put him in and interviewed him together. And unknown to them, they had a hidden tape recorder in with them. So after a while, the sheriff people left them by themselves, and they thought, well, these people are crazy. They're laughing. That they put one over us and everything. And instead, the men were just terrified and were saying, I feel like I'm dead. And all that.
So obviously the tape recorder is designed to catch them talking between themselves and catch them out, and it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, they found out they were terrified, and so then people began believing them. But they had a whole lot of harassment afterwards. The older one, he went on several TV shows and everything, talked about it. Made news just immediately all over the world. And one reason it made news was because there was a whole lot of other things happening. But this just made the news immediately. And a part of it was probably because of the tape recorder and because they caught him in an honest stance saying, they were terrified.
Yeah.
So
So,
the older one's dead now. And the younger one never wanted to talk about it for his whole life until now. And that was in 1973. And he finally started talking about it. And he and his wife worked it out and got brave and decided to go ahead and say something.
yeah, because we were going to be lucky enough to meet Calvin Parker. He were going to come through to the UK, as you know, to the UFO conference, the Outer Limits UFO conference. And I think Calvin had a bit of ill health, and that kind of knocked it back. So we wish him well with that. But so pleased that he has begun to talk about it. But I understand you've got more information, and this is. Do you want to move on with that then? Move on with the information that you found out, or things relating to the new book Beyond Pascagoula.
Yeah. For one thing, my other 3 books have been published by Philip Mannell, and he also published the Calvin Parker 2 books. And he had been a big force in getting Calvin Parker to talk about it, he and Calvin's wife, and to go ahead and write it. Well, so he wanted somebody in the United States to call people and interview them. The other people, there were other people that had sightings, and a lot of people didn't talk about it until then because the atmosphere kind of changed and they were no longer being harassed as much. And people were older and, able to, defend themselves better too.
Yeah.
And so I began interviewing people, and there had been an awful lot of other sightings. And there was this huge, huge wave, UFO wave. And the one of the sheriff's people said that he received 50 calls that night of the
Really? The same night as Calvin's sighting, 1973.
In the same area, 50 calls, and then there were a whole lot of other calls. So a lot of people saw things, but nobody talked about it. And what was interesting is that I had done this study of this noise my mother heard way, way back. And it was exactly the same time as they'd been abducted. And so I put the 2 things together, plus all the other interviews I'd done with people that had seen things in Pascagoula, but there had been just a huge wave at the same time. And I had originally studied that sound before I'd even got into ufology with a geologist, a seismologist, who really helped me. And I'd published in a scientific journal, first of all. And then I could continued studying the sound. And so it was sort of interesting that the coincidence that I was working with that
The
on
sound and the UFO wave. And I do want to touch on this sound. I know we spoke about it, so I don't want to just disregard it. But have we got any examples of the other cases that were reported that night or around the night of Calvin and Charles Hickson's sighting?
There were some really good ones. One is that the very first person I interviewed said that she and her husband, they were on the other side of the Pascagoula River from Calvin and Charles, and she had seen something flying around, and her husband had said, no, it's nothing, and debunked her, but she'd seen something flying around. She said it looked like an airplane, but it looked like it was totally lost, and it was just flying around. And then she said she and her husband were waiting to get on a boat, and they were waiting for his supervisor to come, and he'd been held up. And so her husband decided to go down the pier and get on the boat, and she was following down. And she said this man came out of something that looked like a man came out of the water. And she just seemed very emotional about it. and she couldn't understand how this man came out of the water, and then he came back in, and he just kind of disappeared. And I interviewed her several times, and she seemed very emotional about that. And another thing was, it's like they went down to the pier like about 9 o'clock, and she didn't come back until about 12, and that seemed funny too.
It's funny
And
to
so
her. It
yeah,
seemed funny to her, yeah.
and so I kept interviewing her, and then and you could tell she was really emotional about something, but you couldn't tell exactly what about the man. And then finally, unfortunately, her husband got sick, and he was really, really sick. He died after that. But then he told her. I mean, this happened in 1972, right after they were married, and now it's many, many years later. Her husband told her that they had been abducted, but that he didn't want to ever talk about it because of all the harassment and everything. And he told her about these things or people or whatever they were in the UFOs, and said they had been aboard the UFO. But then her husband was on a ventilator and really, really sick, and he couldn't talk anymore. But she found out that. And so it sounded like there had been another abduction, and that they had been watching the possibly the same UFO that abducted these two people that were fishing, and maybe the same one had also abducted these two people. And so this was really strange, and I think it was the first time anybody ever um, said that maybe possibly the same UFO had abducted two groups of people.
So I take it that you've interviewed this lady in the last few years. So they've sat on this almost 50 years.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
And what's telling is where, as you're retelling the story, even after that length of time, she was still very emotional and disturbed by talking about it.
yes, very much. I mean, that just stood out to me to start with. When she talked about this man, she was really, really emotional. And I, so I just kept asking her about it. And then finally her husband said yes, that they had been abducted, but she still doesn't remember it clearly.
No, it's still quite incredible. And did you unearth any more similar events around the time then? Because obviously we've got you've the new book. It'll not just be a rehash of Calvin's story. All that will be incorporated, and this new witness. But do you have more inside the book?
Yeah, there were, I mean, like the man said, there were 50 phone calls, and so 50 people didn't call, there maybe one or something. And so we're finally finding these other people, and some of them I'm trying to trace if they'd talked to other people back then. But another one was, for example, the two men were criticized because there was a big bridge across the road not too far from them, and people working on machines and stuff. And everybody said, well, these people should have seen things. Well, they probably did, but they didn't talk about it. Now some of them are talking about it, and like one of them was a crane operator who was uh, operating one of those big cranes in the Pascagoula River at the same time. And he said that he saw something, and then that there was something wrong with the crane, and his supervisor said, you have to pay attention to this, and he did. When he looked back, he didn't see it, but he said it was really, really strange, sort of a blue thing.
What this object? Do you think it was below the water at times, and has anybody reported anything below the surface of the river? Because you're talking about seeing a man walking out, or some kind of being walking out of the river.
Yeah, there were two really newsworthy things that happened at Pascagoula then. One was the abduction, but the other thing was um, uh, U, US unidentified submerged object, unidentified submarine object. And this also made the big news a few weeks later. And this made real serious news. Everybody made fun of the 2 abductees, which they're not doing as much now. But the unidentified submerged object was taken very seriously by the Coast Guard and the Navy and investigated. And these fishermen had reported this light that was, or object that was submerged. And they couldn't figure out what it was. And I interviewed one of them. There was only one alive, so far as I can tell, so far as anybody knows. But the Navy and the Coast Guard, they had contacted the Navy to see if the Navy would investigate while the thing was going on. And 2 Coast Guard guys came out and they saw it too, whatever the thing was. And one of the men had tried to hit it with a big oar, and the thing sounded like metal, and it was it seemed to be guided, and it seemed to know where the area underwater was, and it seemed to stay in this place where you could go out. There was sort of a trench underwater in the Pascagoula River, and it seemed to follow that. But they saw it for about 3 hours, and they couldn't figure out what it was. It was a light and apparently something metallic under the water. And so it took a while because they didn't have, modern boats, but they came back and got the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard came out. The Coast Guard was mystified too. And the Coast Guard man, one of them said it was really strange because when he held an oar over the light in the water, it was like the light was like X-rays and it came right through the oar and there was no shadow or anything, which was really strange. And nobody had ever seen anything like it. And it was very seriously investigated for several reasons. One was that this was a, Ingalls, Huntington Ingalls Industries, which was one of maybe the biggest shipbuilding industry for the United States for the Navy. It was a big industry, and they were working in that area. And they also had nuclear. They were using. It was sort of hidden, but it had a nuclear thing.
Yeah.
Also, there was kind of a big thing. A lot of things were going on in the United States, like the Watergate and all that, but also there had been a alert that there might be atomic war going on.
So basically, I kind of get the direction this is going. It was taken really seriously because it could have been some kind of threat.
Yeah, it was taken very, very seriously.
Yeah. And do you want to stay on the book a moment longer? Is there any more notable cases? Have you spoke to people, Irena, and not just stay with the Pascagoula book? You will have done. I know. I think I can know what you're going to say. Have you spoke to witnesses and they've come to you with an absolutely incredible account, brilliant story, and you've got it all, and then suddenly they clam up and they don't want to talk about it and they don't want the name used, which you've got to respect and realise that. But do you find that aspect of it quite frustrating when you probably got information somewhere within your files that you really can't share?
No, most of the people, I think people are becoming more open-minded and harass people less. And so I think the scene for UFOs is improving.
What's similar then about UFOs and USOs, or how do they differ?
Well, to us, a submarine is a whole lot different from an airplane. I mean, airplanes flies in the air, and
Yeah, yeah.
there's a really different thing for submarine. But it appears that from some of the observations that maybe the UFOs can go through the air and go through the water, and it doesn't bother them. And that's like the new information, such as the ATIP, that thing with the um,
The
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 tick
the
object
tic
and all
tac.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
That this object was in the water and it came out and all that, which is just what had been discovered way back in 1973. That they said these things. I mean, I had a number of other instances in newspapers, things where they just went down the water and they came back up, and it was nothing like the same.
Do you know? It's so true. We've got reports. I know you don't know the area where we are on the East Yorkshire coast, but we've got reports of spheres of light, primarily red, that I've had reports of entering the sea off East and North Yorkshire. One is by somebody who works at the bird sanctuary, who'd seen a sphere of light while they were working there enter the sea. I've seen, myself and Bob Brown, lights under the sea. I've never seen anything come out. I was with a police officer called Dave Barnes, 2019, walking along the cliff tops and looking into the distance 6 miles away towards Filey. He sort of gets a bit animated and he says a light's just come out of the water, and I managed to film it. It were up in the air so I didn't see it leave the water. And we've got reports, I mean, of similar things. And I mean, how have you got reports that go back decades and decades for this, or is it just in general that you've spoken to people about the objects that can enter and leave the water?
Well, I got into it mainly here with this Pascagoula interviews because I'd heard of it before, but I'd never really interviewed anybody that said, these came out of
Yeah.
the film, out of the water and everything.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about the sound that you've researched, but before we do that, unless I'm putting Les on the spot, if we've any questions, we could go to that, and then, or we'll just do a little bit on the sound and then break away. Is there anything, Les?
Yes, we have some questions, but first, Paul, I've got to remind you of a little bit of housekeeping, and I'm going to put on the screen now your Truth Proof web page, and if you can explain to people what they can do there to submit items of interest to the web page.
Today, obviously, if anybody is interested in the books, the Truth Proof books, they're on the website, truthproof.uk. Please have a look. And I think we've probably just uploaded like a shopping trolley to the site. Well, I'm saying I think. I'm lying. I know we have, because Don's done all that work for me this week. So it's all there. I mean, all the sightings are original. We've not plagiarized anybody else's work. So if you want to read some good original reports, they're on there. Incidentally, we've had 3 in the last 48 hours. One's gone on today from Rochdale. There's another one from Malton, which is quite close to where me and Les are based. And there's another one from Northampton. But 2 of them, the Rochdale and the Northampton one, are describing something very similar. Obviously, I'm going to write these up, and I've contacted one at newspapers already, and I've asked a good friend Tino if he'll contact the paper responsible for the sighting that he's received and passed on to me. And our moderator Deborah has put me in touch with one of these people today, and it involves these huge green spheres, long and thin but circular. And I've never heard reports quite like them. And I've got 2 from unrelated witnesses that are describing the same thing within 24 hours of each other. They've seen an aircraft following them. One's seen the aircraft underneath it. The other one's seen it following it. But they're not quite sure whether they're aircraft. I mean, so that's strange in itself. So anybody that's got any information relating to this time period with green spheres of light being followed by aircraft. And when we say huge, we took one of the witnesses said to me, 3 to 4 Arctic lorries, nose to top on end. That's how deep they were. People have got to have seen this. And, you know, you take one sighting sort of, I don't mean you take it with a pinch of salt. It's credible. It sounds like it's come from a reliable witness. But now we've got 2 describing the same thing from totally different areas, 4 hours apart in car journeys and hundreds of miles apart. And then we've got another one from Malton, which describes a green UFO that's chrome and lozenge shaped. And that's been within the last 24 hours as well. And this guy heard a noise, looked out of his window, and he says it came out of the clouds and stopped again his neighbour's house above the roof. Quite hard to look at the light. He said it was uncomfortable to look at. It hurt his eyes, and he watched it for a considerable length of time. He said it was like shiny, chromed metal and a lozenge shape, slightly flat on the bottom, totally silent. He estimates 40 feet away. And I'm quoting him because we've spoke at length tonight. So we're going to get his report. So I realise I'm droning on again here, and it's Irena's time to talk. So come on, Les, let's have some questions.
Yeah, thanks for that info, Paul. And we'll move on with another question, and it's from Sasha Christie. Welcome to the show, Sasha. What is the most remarkable evidence you have seen, Irena?
I mean, I know I'm telling the truth, although nobody else would. And so I've had several with other people and taking pictures, and that was the most impressive to me.
Let's have a look then. That's a question for Irena. Do you think the Skinny Bob footage is authentic? Are you familiar with the Skinny Bob footage? This was the alien footage supposedly taken on Area 51, I think. Was it an alien in the room, Paul? Just start me on that one.
I don't know. I mean, I've said many times that I tend not to read too much or look at other people's work, don't I? So I can't help you there, Irena. If you've no knowledge of it, hold your hands up.
Whatever it is, I can't think of it now. Maybe
No.
if somebody can jog my memory.
Yeah, well, I'm just reading from Google here, and it says an Air Force UFO footage is showing a grey type alien who might have been a survivor of the Roswell UFO crash.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's any point in us commenting if we've got no knowledge of it. You know, we're speculating, aren't we?
Correct.
Yeah, I know. I mean, maybe it's something I know that I can't remember, but I remember.
Yeah, that's okay. I've got another question from, let's have a look. Professor McLean. What is Irene's opinion of Bob Lazar's revelations?
I don't have opinion. I don't know. I've read about them and heard about them, but I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. And we've got.
They agreed with my husband that there's a lot underground. That's what he told me. It's about as much as I know.
Okay. And Jane Louise Bowery, welcome to the show, Jane. Irena, have you ever felt you are being watched or followed?
I don't know. I can't answer that either. Most of the time, I don't feel I've been watched or followed, but once I had this, suddenly I developed this horrible fear of UFOs. I was just living my normal life, working and having a family and everything. And suddenly I became terrified of UFOs. And then later, I was scared to be alone because I was afraid UFOs get people alone. Well, then later, while I was at work in the daytime, working with Ph.D.s and professors and things, I saw a UFO. And I pointed out it was outside, and I got a whole lot of witnesses. That seemed funny because it was, I just had this really bad feeling, and I was scared to go outside, and I was scared to not be around people. And then for some reason I saw a UFO, and it was right in the middle of the city. It was over an airport and over Ohio State University. And I got professors and other people for witnesses. And so it was exactly the opposite of what I was scared of. But
what were their reaction to when because you're in their company and they've seen the UFO? What blasé or?
Well, it was a real funny thing because it looked different at first, but then I was just walking down the stair steps and I saw this thing up above. They had, big windows, and I saw somebody I knew and I asked, "What's that?" And she said, "I don't know." And so we went into the office, and from there it was drifting away. It was in sight for like 15 minutes or maybe 25 minutes. And at that time, it just looked like a rectangle. It was very slowly rotating, like about once every minute, and it had a light underneath it. And it would disappear and then it would reappear. And so there were people coming in and out of the office, and there were professors and things. And I asked everybody, "What is this thing?" And nobody had any idea. It was before drones or anything like that. There were no propellers on it. It was just like a square. It was like a rectangle with a circle underneath it, and it was rotating. And so I asked people to, and then I called somebody at Battelle Memorial Institute, a scientist, and he went up to the roof of the building and he couldn't see it. And then he called the airport, and it was drifting toward the airport. And they said they didn't see anything. They couldn't get anything on radar, but we could all see it. And so I asked people, including professors, to write a witness report. And I told them, this will be confidential. I'm not going to get the newspapers in. And so I got a bunch of reports. But and I put that in my book too, and I actually put the names of the people, even though I couldn't contact them. So that was very impressive.
Just before we move on to another question, because it just occurred to me when you said looked like a rectangle. Have you done any research into the black triangles?
No.
Okay.
Well,
I've said that.
I had another sighting where I photographed something that there were 3 lights, but then it was at night, and then other lights had come on. And so part of the time it was like a triangle, but part of the time it had more lights. And
Yeah.
I was thinking, at night, if you can't see, well, if you see 3 lights, well, you don't know exactly what shape anything is or
It's gonna look
anything
like
else.
a triangle, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
something interesting is that several weeks ago, a B-2 bomber came over my house real close, and I put pictures on Facebook and everything. And that was sort of like a triangle, although it was in daytime and I got good pictures of it. It was pretty interesting. But if it's at night and you see 3 lights, we don't know if there's a triangle, what there is.
That's true, because three of anything can look like a slightly elongated triangle or whatever. Because you get that. I've sort of noticed when I know when we've been out looking at the sky and things, you see 3 lights. Oh, I've seen a triangle. Well, it's going to look like a triangle, isn't it? It might not be a perfect triangle, but that's what it's going to look like. But it could be just one on each wingtip and one on front of a plane, and we just can't quite see it because it's a long way away. So we'll jump back to Les and see if he's got any more questions for us, if that's okay, Irena.
Yes, I don't think I've got any more questions through from Debbie at the moment. There's nothing shown on here, unless my machine's stuck. So I'll let you run with it, Paul. And thank you very much, Irena, for some of the questions.
It's left if people want to run with that, but let's talk about this sound, Irena, that you investigated, because I mean, I don't mean it's something that's underrated or overlooked, but a lot of people report even silence is a sound. That do you know what I mean? The sort of lower silence, the Oz factor. I know we're probably not going to touch on that here, although we could ask you about it. But you did some research into the sound. So do you want to tell us a little bit about it? And is this due to the 1973 sighting, or is it before that?
Well, it's the one I told you about my mother calling me, and it was 1973, and it was just about exactly the same time as these people saw as the abduction happened by some coincidence. But they were down in Pascagoula, and the sound was over more over central United States. But I had, first of all, I wasn't in UFOs then, and I'd just been interested in it, and because my mother was a real skeptic, and she had called and said she heard this sound, and she had also called later and said there was this big flap of UFOs, and that everybody had seen UFOs, and people were hiding in their closet at night, and one of her friends were chased and everything else, and she was a real skeptic, so it sounded funny. And I didn't pay attention to it for many years later. But then I was working at Ohio State, and they had a newspaper room, and just for something to do, I decided to go in and look around, see if I could find when that sound was. And I just vaguely remembered it was in the middle of October '73, but I wasn't sure if I remembered that. And I looked in the newspaper room, there were all these newspapers, and I thought, I will never find it. And so I pulled out one from the middle of October '73 and found it right away. A little article about this strange sound. And so then I had a date, and I started exploring, and I wasn't in UFOs, and for some reason, I decided to put it in a scientific journal. I mean, I was had a PhD and everything, and so I was writing it up. And this man that was a seismologist, the state of Ohio seismologist, was quite interested, and he pulled seismograph records and things, and we looked at it, and I published it in a scientific journal. Well, then later, some UFO people wanted me to give a speech about it, and so I did. And then I didn't pay attention to it for many, many years, but I started looking at it again sometime later, and I published in the scientists I had contacted before took it seriously, and they were interested. They always say scientists are debunkers. Well, these scientists were interested. And then I published something in the MUFON Journal, the UFO MUFON Journal. And I got really debunked then by this man who said it was a SR-71 airplane, that big airplane that goes many times the speed of sound and everything. And I very weakly debunked him and said, no, the sound wasn't the same place, but I didn't have a lot of data to say anything about it. But since then, NASA has published, has done a lot of studying on sonic booms from SR-71 airplanes, and they know how high the airplane is and how wide the sonic boom carpet is and how the sound comes down, and so that you can estimate this sound from the altitude of the airplane, things like that. And so I decided to do a better newspaper article search, because you can do that on the internet now. And I found a lot of, actually the sound had made, it wasn't just my mother going crazy, it had made the newspapers all across half of the United States, from Iowa to the seacoast, the eastern seacoast. And it just made big newspaper articles about, people ran out of their houses, people thought there were fire engine runs and everything else, because people thought there were explosions. It was really big, and it made like the front page all across the country.
How does the sound compare then to other sounds? Compared
to other sounds, the amount of area it took was like about almost 1,000 miles from Iowa to the seacoast, and maybe it was 500 or more miles wide. And so it was huge. It was in extent, I think it was next to the largest in extent sound ever was that Krakatoa volcano sound, and I think it was 1883 or something. And this was huge. I mean, I couldn't find anything else that that in that extent of how wide and how long it was.
So Irena, why? I'm taking it's remained unexplained. Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
No.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because nobody saw anything, and that was what was strange about it. It started out apparently in Iowa, and it went all the way to Petersburg, Maryland. It was over Washington, D.C., which it was over big populated areas. And they always say UFOs don't have witnesses. Well, this would have had millions and millions and millions of witnesses, because it was written up in all these papers. And people were running out of their houses, contacting the neighbors, thinking their houses had exploded and everything. But
And how long did it last? How long did this last?
I converted it to Eastern Standard Time. It lasted from about 8:20 Eastern Standard Time in Iowa until about before 9 at the coast. So it took about 40 minutes to go the whole way, approximately. But it registered on 2 seismographs, and so that was the best time I had. And calculating from the 2 seismographs, it was about 2.9 times the speed of sound. But I don't know if it was a sonic boom or not. It was obviously something, but they couldn't find anything that caused it. They couldn't find airplanes or anything.
So obviously, I mean, we're going back 50 years, but it must have made the news at that time. There will be loads of recorded evidence of this in archives.
Yeah, I studied the newspaper reports, and it made the news just in increments across the country.
Yeah.
Is it across the country, and it made the front page of a lot of newspapers in a lot of places, that there was a strange sound, and nobody could. They had radar and everything back then, and they did radar searches, and people looked for airplanes, and they couldn't find anything.
So how does it relate then to the UFO phenomena?
Well, there wasn't any explanation for the sound, and I was able to get a good estimate of where it was and how fast it was going. And at first, it was explained by an SR-71, as my debunker had. And my debunker said, there'd been a SR-71 there. Well, there had been, but it was in a different place in the sound. And I didn't know exactly at that time how to address it, because I didn't know how wide or how big or anything about the sound from SR-71, but NASA later had published information on that I could use. And it was definitely not where the sound should have been from an SR-71. And I knew where the SR-71 went. I knew where the sound went, and it was 2 different places. But the scientists at first said it was the SR-71, then changed their mind, and they said it was a meteor. But there's no trace of a meteor. And so they explained it as like an earth-grazing meteor that one skips across the earth. Well, I was able to calculate its speed, and to be an earth-grazer a meteor, it has to be escape velocity, or else it would land and
Right.
be a meteorite. And so there was nobody saw a meteor, nobody saw anything landing. And its speed was nothing even close to what a meteorite would be, or a
Okay.
meteor. And so I don't think it was an earth-grazer meteor. And so I just couldn't figure out what it is, and I still don't know. And so I just said, this might have been a UFO, because nobody saw anything that didn't. So that's why nobody paid attention to it. But there was still a very strange sound.
Interesting, and it really is, because I don't know who else but yourself has done a lot of research on that, Irena, and it's something that's sort of probably gone past a lot of researchers.
Yeah, because nobody saw anything, and so it didn't attract the attention of, like, it was kind of like the Kecksburg thing, except people saw that. But I calculated the speed of it, and it was definitely below a meteor speed too, and it was explained scientifically as a meteor, which I don't think it was.
You're a good person to have in the corner fighting a case, Irena, I think, don't you? Calculating things that I couldn't possibly do. We'll just go back to Les for a moment and see if there's any more questions coming from our listeners, please.
We have got some more questions in, and first of all, though, I'd just like to say to everybody, we have, when I can find it, we have Paul's books for sale. Paul has, is it 4 books you've got out there, Paul, now?
I think. I keep saying very soon. I've got to give them.
Yeah, and as you can probably see, viewers, that we have Paul's books on the background there. Now, all the books can be bought from his truthproof.uk webpage. If you want to read any reviews on the books, the best place to go is to Amazon to read the reviews, but buy the books, please, from truthproof.uk. And also, okay, yeah, so we'll go on to some questions then, Irene. Johnny Cash. Welcome to the show, Johnny. I don't think it's the Johnny Cash. But could I ask Irene, after your encounters, has strange things happened at your home?
After the encounter my sister and I had, something strange, yes, happened. I had a poltergeist. And it happened to us in Massachusetts, and I came home to Washington, D.C., and I had to go to work the next day, and I'd never heard of poltergeist. And these weird things happened that night, and I thought I'd gone crazy, and I was afraid to go to work because I was afraid I'd just gone insane, and I had this huge security clearance, and so it was pretty weird. But yeah, I had poltergeist after that one instance.
Just before we move on, what did it do, Irena? What was the poltergeist interaction?
Well, what happened was I went to bed and turned off the light and everything. Was going to sleep that night, and I started hearing somebody walking through my room, through my place I was staying, and like a man with shoes on, and I'd hear him walk for a while and then stop, and then I'd hear him walk someplace else and stop. And if it got close, I tried to feel, and I couldn't feel anything. There was a little bit of light coming, street light coming through, and I couldn't see anybody, but I could hear somebody walking. And this was pretty scary. But I went to sleep, and then my alarm went off. And I got up and started making breakfast, and I realized it was dark, and it should have been light. And I looked at the time, and my clock said 1:30, and I had this clock set for like 6:30 or something, and the knob on my clock had broken, and it was real hard to set. I just set it approximately, or else use a pliers. And so I set it approximately, and I was terrified. But I went back to sleep, and the alarm went off again, and it was 2:30, set right on the dot, like I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I was terrified again. I put a chair against the door, and I went back to sleep. The next time it woke me up at 3 o'clock, and at 4 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock. Well, at 5 o'clock, I was pretty scared. I was scared of whatever was happening. I thought I'd just gone insane. I thought I'm going to lose my job and be out with a cup on the street if I've gone insane and lose my security clearance. And I was trying to figure out how to hide insanity at work if I kept on having things like that happen. And then my toothbrush just flew across the room and hit the wall from nowhere. There was nothing behind me. And I was pretty worried but I went to work and everything became normal the rest of my life. So
Yeah,
that was it.
and that were interesting. Seriously, a great question, and thank you for asking. And Les, have we more questions? We'll see if we can fit a few more in. Or
Yeah, I've got a couple more here.
I do want before we end. I'm sorry for I asked Les and then I've cut in, so I apologise, Les. But I do want to spend 2 minutes for Irene to tell us where we can get her books and everything before we close this down. But fire away, Les.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And I just like to say, if you've enjoyed or enjoying tonight's show, please hit the like, subscribe, and all that jazz. You'll know the score. And we'd really appreciate that. It helps get our algorithms up there and out into the ether so that everybody in the future can enjoy the show. Right then, I've got a question from Teresa Walker. Welcome to the show, Teresa. Has Irene heard of the KGB identification of multiple species of aliens visiting Earth? And does she think the information is valid? So the multiple species, what the KGB have identified of late. Are you aware of that, Irena?
I think that there's some mind control involved in UFO phenomena, and I think there might be the ability to take different appearances instead of just being different beings. That whatever it is can just take different appearances. So I don't know.
And that is a good answer. You know, when we talk about the advancement of UFOs throughout the decades and the nuts and bolts craft, and now as we're watching different things on TV, people are kind of reporting seeing the things that are on TV. You know what I mean? Is it misidentification, or is it the actual phenomena adapting and almost like a chameleon to how we're advancing? But yeah, great answer, Irena. Les?
Yeah, thanks for that, Irena. A question from Justin Apple. Irene, what are your opinions on the latest Pentagon UAP report that was released in June?
Well, a lot of people weren't happy about it, and a lot of people said they didn't go far enough. And I was very happy because I thought just going the tiniest little bit was better than nothing. And they admitted that there's things they don't understand, which they'd never admitted before. That always before they said, "Oh, we know everything that can't possibly be," and there's a little slit there to stick your toe in and get the door open a little farther.
Yeah, good, yeah.
And the last question I have on here for now is Space Cadet Lottie. Question: has Irena ever spoke with Stan Gordon?
Yeah, I think so. A long time ago, years ago. I think I even interviewed him, maybe. I'm not sure. It was quite a long time ago, and I don't remember too well.
For the people listening in, Irena, can you just tell me who Stan Gordon is?
Oh, is he the person in Pennsylvania that studied the Kecksburg thing?
And I don't know.
Oh, that's who I was thinking it was.
Okay, right. Well, then if Les is done with the questions...
That's all I've got now, Paul. Thank you.
No, that's all good. What are your views on the abduction phenomena? Do you think it's all love and light? Or do you think there's a more sinister aspect to the...
I don't know. As I said, I think there's some mind control going on with the UFO phenomena. And I don't know how physical the abduction is. In some ways, it seems pretty physical, but it's like, like a UFO being should be able to look on Facebook and find out everything they want to know about anybody actually now. And so I don't know why they'd even abduct. Okay. I mean, that's, but
so where do you see your research going then forward from today and now? Obviously you're working on the new book, but what other projects have you got in mind to do?
Well, I'm still working on this because there's still people coming by that I'm interviewing. Everyone I interview, I find out some more aspects of the
Yeah.
UFO phenomena. And
And have you ever met anybody that's given you some information that that's potentially could change the direction of the subject and new revelations, but you can't talk about it?
no, I can talk about everything I know.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
have
but has anybody ever divulged anything to you that you can't talk about? You know, they don't want you to talk about. I'm not expecting you to say anything now, but has that ever happened?
Well, people don't want me to give their name, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
some people have, and so I didn't divulge anything. But it wasn't really too important either.
Well,
So
before we wrap this up, then where can people buy your books and find out more about Irena as a researcher and the work that you do?
well, I've had 3 books published, and the next one's coming up. The first one is called UFOs Today. They're all on Amazon.com, and I also have a webpage called irenascott.com, and I have my books on that, and it's easy to find. You just click on a book, and it immediately goes into Amazon.com, so you can order it. One's
Excellent.
called UFOs Today, one's called Inside the Lightning Ball, the other one's called Sacred Corridors, and the new one coming out is Beyond Pascagoula, and they're all on Amazon.com.
Okay, and it sounds like you've got enough work in front of you, Irena, at the moment to keep you going for a considerable length of time. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I've really enjoyed speaking with you, Irena, and thank you for taking time,
Well, thank you.
time out to, spend almost 2 hours with us. And from myself, thank you very much. And I'll just see whether Les has got any parting comments or words to say.
Yeah, I've got to say from my end, thank you very much, Irena, for tonight's show. And I will close the show out now. Let's have a look. Right, okay. Thanks everybody for tuning in as per usual. We had a great guest on, Irena Scott, and she gave some wonderful information, and obviously we will put the links on to her website, and as Irena said herself, all the books are available from that website. And I've just got to say, we have a Truth Proof books on the screen now. If anybody wants to buy them, I'll just repeat myself. They can be bought from Paul's website. Is truthproof.uk. I'll get that one right. So it just remains for me to say thanks everybody for being in tonight's chat. Thanks for all the great questions for our guest Irena tonight. And I've got to thank Paul Sinclair for another great live stream. So who we got on next week, you're asking? Well, we don't know yet, but you will be informed. Yeah, we're run by the seat of our pants on this show, as you know, guys. But I'm sure we'll be back next week. So on that note, it's bye from me and bye from Paul and Irena. Good night. No audio onto the web. You're free to talk.